welcome back. I'm Wyatt Sharp. Today we're talking about a number of different things. First budget 2025 set for November the 4th with $486.9 billion in spending, a 2.5% GDP deficit, and U.S. tariffs still up for debate, all as U.S. President Donald Trump now is talking again about making Canada the 51st state. Joining us to talk about it all is Anthony Koch of AK Strategies and former spokesperson for Pierre Poilievre. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's just start out on the budget side of things. Of course, Mark Carney, this is kind of his first fiscal test, if you will, going back to the campaign where he talked a lot about wanting to bring back fiscal responsibility, something that, of course, was lost over the course of the Trudeau government. I guess just to kind of put it to you first, is this kind of reboot, if you will, in his fiscal approach, something that conservatives might have a hard time addressing from a strategy standpoint, given that over the course of the past few years, anyways, one of the biggest lines of attack has been that liberals are fiscally irresponsible?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any indication, Wyatt, that this mythological, fabled Mark Carney reset actually represents anything all that different from what we saw from Justin Trudeau over the course of the last 10 years. We're talking some of the projections that are already circulating around record deficits for Canada. You had the parliamentary budget officer come out, basically ring every five-alarm fire or fire alarm, whatever the expression is, to say that Canada is walking a very dangerous path, and that the kind of changes that he believes are absolutely necessary for our country to maintain some fiscal sanity are not anywhere in the docket of at least the rumors that we've seen. Now, again, it would be helpful to actually have a copy of the budget to be able to comment on this a little bit better. This one's coming later than it does in normal years and later than even the government had originally suggested. So we'll see what comes out. But I don't think there's any indication right now. I think Mark Carney definitely did a decent job over the course of the election campaign of building this mystique around himself, largely on the strength of his previous pre-politics CV, that he was this finance guru. But up until this point, I don't think there's any actually merits to the idea that he's going to be having all that much of a different approach in terms of government spending than what his predecessor did.
And when we talk about even the last election, going back to January when I was at the inauguration, even and Donald Trump took office, even then it was still at least plausible. Of course, Justin Trudeau was still at the helm at the time, that Pierre Poilievre was going to be the prime minister and that he was going to be able to come. He was going to axe the tax, as one of his slogans was, and it was resonating with a lot of people. And then when Mark Carney came in, as you point out, it kind of seems as if he tried to brand himself as the finance guy, as the guy who would bring back a sense of normalcy, if you will, in terms of budgets and fiscal processes and stuff as well. But in terms of what the conservatives need to do, because you have the leadership review coming up, and then you have just kind of the overall question of where they're going to go from here. How do you plan, again, from a strategy perspective, if you don't know what you're going to be planning for in the case of the budget, where some people are saying we're leaning more towards the fiscally responsible side, but then, as you point out, you have the parliamentary budget officer coming out with really a totally different picture?
Yeah, well, there's really good people working in Pierre's OLO who are going to be sitting around the clock, preparing multiple different case scenarios, depending on what kind of budget we actually find. So that's sort of how that goes out from a strategy perspective. But again, I don't think, barring anything crazy a la Jean Chrétien 1990s, I'd be shocked to see if Mark Carney comes forward, especially with the news that we've seen over the course of the last few months, with some sort of crazy multiple tens of billions of dollars worth of cut to the federal government. I don't think it's politically viable. And this is what we speak about. He presented himself as this finance guru, and that was popular with a specific segment of the electorate. We also have to understand Mark Carney's coalition is very large. And if he decides to go too much on the social or the fiscal conservative side of things, he's going to have some problems in his own caucus and in his own voter coalition. So I don't think we're going to see any conservative revolution under Mark Carney.
Just quickly here, about 30 seconds before we go to break, but do you think moving forward in terms of kind of this mentality of the political elite, if you will, versus everyday people, does Mark Carney and his government have a better grasp of that, would you acknowledge, perhaps, than someone like Justin Trudeau's government did? And is that perhaps why the Liberals aren't seeing as big a dip in the polls as you might have expected by this far into their term?
I don't think it's been that far. I also think, right, it's been summer. People aren't really paying attention to politics. There was a period of about 2 years, especially post-COVID, where Canadians became hyper-political in a way that they don't usually. I think there was an election. There was a result. There's a new guy at the helm. People are taking a bit of a deep breath. They want to give him a little bit of leeway, see what he can do. And it's still too early. But I think this parliamentary session will be the beginning of people seeing if Mark Carney really is just like Justin, like the tagline used to say. But I still think we're very much in that original phase post-election. People were a little bit politically exhausted. They want to give the new man some benefit of the doubt, but now they're looking to see some results.